Thanks very much for coming to hear Dean Saul Levmore, and he will be giving the Sumner Canary Lecture. I'm going to tell you more about Dean Levmore in a minute, but I first wanted to talk a little bit about the lecture series. The Sumner Canary Lecture is really one of the most esteemed lectureships, I think, in all of legal education. It's been given by a group of people who are really sort of a who's who of the legal profession, several Supreme Court justices over the years. So this is really an honor for me to be able to give an introduction to it. It began in 1980 to honor Judge Canary, who was a 1927 graduate of the law school here. He practiced law in Cleveland as a solo practitioner, then in a partnership, and then with the firm of Arter and Haddon from 1942 to 1972. He served as a U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Ohio from 1954 to 59, and was appointed to the Ohio Court of Appeals for the 8th District in 1967. Nancy Canary has been supporting this lecture to honor her late husband since it began over 25 years ago, and we're very grateful for that. This has really been a great benefit to the law school, and if you don't mind, Nancy, if you don't mind standing up so people can recognize you and thank you for this. I should also add, in addition to the lectureship, her contributions to the law school include helping a new dean make the transition to the deanship here. She's really been very welcoming and supportive of me since I arrived last summer, even hosted an alumni reception for me near her winter home in Florida, so I'm really grateful for that. Let me tell you about Saul Levmore. He has, I was thinking of many deans, well, certainly today less so, but you often do get deans who are really distinguished scholars. There may be a tendency away from that in recent years, but if you were thinking of which deans are really distinguished scholars, you really can't do any better than Saul Levmore. I mean, he is a truly national figure as a scholar, and remarkably so really in several different fields. So in torts, corporations, public choice, among other areas, he's really a nationally recognized scholar, has a list of publications that would put anyone to shame. His background, he has a BA from Columbia, a JD and PhD in economics from Yale, and I noticed had the distinction while he was a graduate student at Yale, was a dean of one of the colleges at Yale at the time. I don't know of too many people who did that as graduate students, but he started teaching at Virginia right after he got his law degree. He was a chaired professor by the age of 40. 9 years ago, he left Virginia for Chicago, and a few years after that became the dean. As evidenced by his talk today, Parental Leave and Other Embarrassments, even during his deanship, he has continued to find time for interesting and important scholarship. So let me stop here and turn it over to Saul Levmore, the 2007 Sumner Canary Lecture.
Well, thank you very much. I like the idea of these webcasts because slowly but surely lectures will go to empty rooms, and then you'll watch through some flash drive that you'll insert in the side of your head in an opening. And I feel like, try as you may, this is probably one of the last Canary lectures that will ever be really live. So I'm really happy you invited me before we just, braincast it or whatever it is. But I will try here and there to mumble a few things so that you'll feel privileged that you and I could share the moment and the people on podcasts would miss it. And then just laugh really hard or do something to make them feel bad that they missed the entire experience. So let me jump right into my topic. And the idea is that I will try, as very much I understand in the case Western tradition, to finish in time for some questions. where I don't think I call on you Socratically, but I think you volunteer some questions. But, we'll see what happens. And on we go. So the talk is a little bit as advertised. I mean, I do want to start with the puzzles that the handsome flyer advertised. And those were, as you may recall, why does the United States have a famously ungenerous parental leave policy? That is, it's a positive question, and I'll give you a little bit of evidence about that, though newspapers have supplied you with plenty of evidence about that too. And then what is, to me, maybe the more interesting question, although I think there are some interesting answers to that question, maybe as many as 3 answers we'll try. And then there is also, maybe the real question is, so let's predict what will happen in the future. That is, what's the future of parental leave or of children or of people in the workforce with children and so forth? And is there anything that we can understand about our uniquely American experience that will carry over and help us figure out where we're going? Now, I have some empirical evidence that I'm going to present, which I hope won't bore you too much, but I have biased it towards the law firm experience on grounds that we have some people here who actually work at law firms, we have people here who actually abandon law firms, and we have plenty of people who think they're going to law firms. And I sort of want to talk about them a little bit, about what's likely to be in their future and so forth. But in questions and answers, we could talk a little bit, if you like, about other industries and what the norms are there and whether there's really something to this idea. So let's see, we need some facts in common. I think most people have, but I'll proceed as if you know less than you do. So in the United States, we have this Family Leave Act that people are probably familiar with, and it requires a fair number of employers. Let's make believe that it requires all private employers and most other employers, though that's not quite true. But it requires a lot of things, and one of the things it requires is that you need, aside from whatever other policies you have, you need to take certain triggering events, and childbirth is one of those events, and if the triggering event occurs, that employee's job needs to be retained. So the employee has the right to leave the job for a while and go have a child, or bring up a child in the case of other forms of parenting and so forth. And then the employer needs to hold the job for the person to come back to work. So, and we have a 12-week rule about that. 12 weeks, as we'll see, is a sort of typical number for lots and lots of policies around the world. So this is unpaid leave, just to make sure we understand each other, right? You go, the employer holds the job, you come back, the job is there, unless certain things happen, and there's all sorts of complications. Now, as you probably know from your own job market experience, that's not really the picture in the United States. The real picture is that there's this 12 weeks of unpaid leave by right, but then many, many people, especially people we are fortunate enough to know and be, many, many people work for employers who provide non-mandated paid leave. So really, I'm going to refer to this as our 2-tier system. That is, there's some employees who get 12 weeks of unpaid leave, just as there were in the old days before 1993, many employees who got no leave, so to speak. And many employees who get high-end leave. So, for example, I'll give you more details, but if you go to a law firm now, there are some pretty good policies out there. The 5 best policies in Chicago, from what I could find, looking at these NELP sites and so forth, might give as much as 4 months paid leave to somebody. So that's worth a lot of money, and we'll go into the cost of these things in a minute. Sometimes it's divided between a childbirth and a child care sort of component, a subject I'll get back to that responds to discrimination law or expected employment discrimination law by gender. But we'll go back to that. Anyway, if we focus on our mandated leave, that is what the government requires, we are ungenerous. That's what I mean by ungenerous leave. And you probably know as much about this as I do, but I'll just give you some numbers. So Sweden famously gives 18 months at 80% pay. Norway gives you a choice. You can either take 52 weeks at 80% pay, or 42 weeks at full pay. Now, when I say full pay, as I'll emphasize, some of these countries, full pay means full pay up to a cap. And some of these countries, full pay really means full pay. And I don't know that it'll make that much difference for us to get it all right just now. But be assured that somebody who goes to, a Wall Street law firm and makes $160,000 a year, there are very, very, very few countries where that person by statute could get 4 months at $160,000. That is, the Wall Street, here's your money for 4 months, is very, very high. In Sweden, you would not get that much money. I mean, their salaries are much more compressed or egalitarian, and there are caps. It's a little bit more like workers' compensation plus. But still, we give nothing by mandate. I don't want to be defensive about American leave. Ours is ungenerous, however you measure. Wall Street's is generous, however you measure, a subject we'll return to at some length. Canada, United Kingdom, I mean, they might be countries that look more like us, and not just because of the language that some of them speak, but I'll go into in a minute why they look like us. The sort of common thing might be something like, here, I have the UK thing here, 6 weeks at 90% paid leave, real 90% paid leave. You make $150,000, you get more than $100,000 for 6 weeks, followed by 33 weeks that looks like workers' compensation, some fixed level, about $400 a week, $500 a week. So the rate of $20,000 or $25,000 a year, no matter what your income. And then you can have up to 13 more unpaid weeks. So it's sometimes described as, the United Kingdom gives 1 year of leave. That's much better than our 12 weeks, but again, only a short period of that is highly paid. Then there's a long period of modestly paid, and so forth. Okay. Before getting to some themes about this, I want to just remind you of something I've already said. I'm going to keep saying paid leave and unpaid leave. I just want to emphasize it's a little bit ambiguous because paid leave in some countries has a cap, in some countries has a fraction. It's a mess, and I don't feel like it's useful every time for me to explain which one's which and which country you should try to move to if you're pregnant or anything of the sort. Although, as you'll see, Bulgaria is the quick answer to that. But I'll leave that alone. What I do want to emphasize, though, I mean, one fact that's worth bearing in mind is that these systems really divide into two. There are countries where the paid leave is in the form of a social insurance policy. So you get the money from the government, though that government money comes from some combination of government payments and employer payments and sometimes even employee payments. In other words, there are dedicated taxes that go to this fund, then there's a national fund, then you have a triggering event like childbirth, though in some of these countries you could be the father as well as the mother, or adoption in most of these countries, and then you get to draw on this national fund, which is not bankrupt. I mean, I don't mean to belittle the fund. I mean, there are these real funds there, and that's how you collect your money in the UK or in Canada or Bulgaria or Sweden or what have you. And then there are other countries that are Europe has mostly social insurance plans of this kind. Then there are other countries where it's more in the form of employer mandates. The government might contribute a little bit, but basically the government is saying to the employer, you need to give this amount of leave if you have, say, 7 employees or more. It looks a little bit like an American system. It's like, say, worker safety under OSHA. You know, we have a pretty stringent worker safety rule, but it's not as if the government comes in at its expense and gets rid of the asbestos and puts lights that don't explode and does all and takes rid of the rough edges. It's more that the government sends an inspector and makes sure that Case Western has done those things, and Case Western spends the money doing it, and if it doesn't do it, it could be an occupational safety problem and so forth. That's what a good number of countries do. Let's call it half. Half the countries are employer mandates. Your employer must give you this paid leave of a certain amount. Economists might argue whether you really pay for it, because maybe wages are lower in that country, or maybe the other employees pay for it, a subject we'll go into in a moment. But in any event, the government is at least not on its surface paying the money. Employer mandates are generally disfavored in the blogosphere, I should say. That is, the sort of conventional wisdom is that employer mandates are dangerous because it might really lead to a chilling effect on employment. If the employer knows that it's very costly to have you in the workforce because they'll have to give you a year of paid leave, the employer might be more inclined to hire workers who are beyond their years of childbirth or of a sex that's not yet able to give birth, and so forth and so on. Though again, in some countries there'll be paternal leave as well as maternal leave. So employer mandates are not really popular in the literature, but they are popular out there in the world. China, Indonesia, Asia is actually big on employer mandates, and some of them are generous. China is really, I'll talk about China later because it wouldn't be an academic talk these days if we didn't have a little China in there. China is really an interesting system, which I'll return to twice. China offers 90 days of employer-mandated paid leave, full pay, and 120 days if the mom is over 25. So it's like if you're old then you obviously are weak. And so you need, or maybe a stronger interest group. I mean, you know, I don't know which way it cuts. And you get more leave. As I'll point out later, but I can't resist saying it now, I started getting interested in the subject before I made a trip to China recently. So everywhere I would go, I would ask people about, you know, maternal leave, because they didn't have paternal leave. And everybody would say, oh, it's really amazing, 90 days, if you're over 25. Oh, well, have you taken it? No. And indeed, I still have not found a single Chinese woman who's taken this leave, though everybody insists that it's there. Oh, well, it's like old-fashioned United States. Well, I wasn't so sure it was good for my career to take this leave. And again, that is what's thought to be the risk of these employer mandates, that, you know, you'd really need a big cultural thing. This is the dean in me. I can't help it. You have to move down and come see. It's going to be like a 3-hour talk. I mean, you want to trust me. You don't want to stand for this whole talk. Okay. Anyway, at last count, since I want to get to the meat of the argument, because there's an argument coming. At last count, there were 163 countries that gave some form of paid leave, and of those, 45 also gave some form of paternal leave, right? Father leave as opposed to mother leave. So I think it's fair to say that we are at best in 164th place. That is a fair way to think about it. That we have some unpaid leave, but we are the 164th most generous country out of people who do treaties know how many countries there are at this moment, but you know, there are roughly 190 countries that we have records of. There are some more countries than that, but we're not really sure what the rules are there. So we are way, way, way down there. And that's what I mean by ungenerous leave. Okay. Now, let me get rid of one explanation that I don't want to use, and again, that was advertised. And I'm not counting this as one of my 3 explanations. I don't want people to think, and maybe there's an argument here, but I don't want to go there. Some people will just say, oh, well, this is not surprising that we are 164th place, because we just don't like welfare systems. I mean, we're a country that's low on the welfare state compared to other countries. And, oh, we like private markets better, you know, however you want to say it. And so this is just of a piece with that. I mean, you could build an argument like that, but I don't want to go there. I don't think it's quite right. I mean, if you count employer mandates, which we're counting, our Disabilities Act law, our occupational safety law, our environmental law, lots of our workplace law, we're not in 164th place. In some of those things, we have the most generous. I think our disabilities law is about up there. It's certainly in the top 20, so to speak. Now, it might be that if you combine it with welfare payments and other things, it might be that on a per capita GNP basis, we are one of the least welfarist countries. But I'm not even sure about that. I mean, I don't think we're that ungenerous if you take employer mandates into account. It's true that we don't like direct government payments for things compared to most of our countries that we think of as our peer nations, so to speak, in terms of cultural norms. But, you know, parental leave is different. We are way down on the list, however you count, and I don't think that's true for other things. Though, again, I can understand that people might want to argue with that, but I don't, you know, I only have a limited amount of time, and so I don't want to dwell on that too much. All right. Now I want to start with some other explanations before I get to our private market. So here's a thing you might not want to hear. Most people who are interested in parental leave are interested in generous parental leave. That is, that's the social norm now. And indeed, I don't know, this morning some of us were talking about blogs. I don't know what you know about blogospheres, but I have received emails from people who say, oh, I saw you giving a talk at Case Western on parental leave. You know, people find these things through your online, you know, websites. And right away I say, oh, you should read this piece I wrote. You will like this so much you should cite it. It's all people who say, you know, if you're pregnant, you should get 8 years of paid leave. I mean, it's all big on generous leave, assuming that I am big on generous leave. And as you'll see, I'm more a predictor than a normative kind of guy. And I do think that there are some things we need to change. But that's not the kind of person I am. I'm not here to tell you what to do as voters or employers. I mean, I'm more making observational comments about how our world will be organized and what we might want to do about it. But it's not particularly about, oh, we're ungenerous, we need to move to first place. This is not an Olympic sport. This is more trying to understand why we have the systems we have and what is going to happen to it, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm happy to talk about. So you might not like the first thing I have to say, but we need to get on the same wavelength. And that is the following. Here's the best explanation. The first cut explanation of why we are in 164th place is the following. There is an inverse relationship between fertility rates. I'm going to modify fertility rate in a minute. Between fertility rates and parental leave. That's the most important factor. You can't get anywhere on this topic without realizing that. The way to look at it is, take Italy, Greece, Spain. These are countries with very generous parental leave. 70% of pay for almost a year, let's say, is typical, about the average in those three countries. Now, those are the three countries with the three lowest fertility rates. So our fertility rate is 2.09. That is, the average woman in the United States has 2.09 children, and that's exactly replacement rate because of emigration, death, and other things. So let's call it, we are pretty much in the middle of the world. I mean, I had some statistics to give you an idea of what 2.09 meant. There are 34 countries with fertility rates above 5, 51 countries above 4.0, 33 countries below 1.5, and 70 countries below 2.0. So we're kind of in the middle, and 2.09 is replacement rate, and I'm going to jump to immigration right away so that this is a little bit original. That's understood in the family economics literature. People understand high fertility rate, you don't need to pay people to have babies. That's kind of understood, though not by lawyers, but by economists. What I want to do is correct it for my first theme about immigration. We don't need babies as an economic matter. That is, if what Spain and Italy is worried about, as they should, is there is going to be nobody to make Social Security payments when they get old. If you are 40 years old in Spain now, you are nervous because they are like us. Their Social Security system is not they take my money, they put it in an account, they wait till I'm old, and then they give it to me. No. They're just like us. They're using that money as fast as they can to pay the people who are old now. And in order to get money when you retire, you need the generation after you to be working and to vote to mail you money. No small task over there. And we realize that as our Social Security crisis, so to speak, and so do they. But we have a big advantage over them. We have a 2.09 fertility rate, and we have maybe 500 million people right now who want to line up at our borders and come in and mail you Social Security checks. So we are, I'm not exaggerating, right? We are in very, very good shape. There are some other countries like us. That is the single best predictor of parental leave policies. So if you're in the United States or another country with healthy, robust, fertility rate, and you have people who want to move into your country, maybe because it's a great place to live, maybe because they live nearby in worse conditions, I mean, that's all sorts of different stories around the globe. You don't, as an economic matter, really need to have a generous policy that encourages people to have kids. I think that's really important for everybody to swallow. Again, I don't mean that normatively. That might not be how I would run the world. I just mean if what you want to do is understand the data, that's the place to start. Could I convince you of that? Well, I promised Bulgaria, so I'll just say Bulgaria has a very, very low fertility rate, not quite as low as Spain and Greece, 1.38. They were 1.28. By the way, that's not the lowest. Hong Kong is 0.9 something. So Hong Kong is the lowest. But of real countries, so to speak, 1.38 is very low. That's Bulgaria. Very, very low fertility rate, 1.38. And from their Social Security point of view, horrific net out-migration. People are leaving Bulgaria. They get trained. They get human capital. They go. They don't have human capital. They go. Everybody leaves Bulgaria. Though I'm told, my fifth grader did it as a school project, and it actually looked okay. I mean, there were some nice pictures and nice holiday costumes and all that, but nobody stays there. So I have Bulgarians. I went and looked up Bulgarians' parental leave policy. 45 days paid sick leave before you give birth, followed by 2 years complete pay after you give birth, and the employer has to hold the job open for 3 years. I mean, that's theme none. So I want to explain. That's theme one. That's the most important thing to understand. Does it make any difference? I'll turn to that one in. Does that raise the Bulgarian birth rate? No. Well, we'll go into that shortly. But that is the single best way to understand the thing. So that's explanation number one, which we'll refine, I'm sure. All right. Explanation number two of fertility rates, and then what we might make of them and understand about our own. Explanation number two is for sophisticated people. I will give it a one-line explanation. I don't mean that the rest of you are unsophisticated. Well, actually, I know. I just mean that you might not be used to the jargon. This explanation is basically going to be that it's about homogeneity of the population and moral hazard in insurance. So now let me stress this a little bit. So I should say, as an appropriate moment, that this is a fun theory to expound here, because as you may or may not know, Judge Canary was a really important insurance lawyer and thinker. So I've done a little bit of research about him. And he knew a lot about insurance. And insurance is sort of a great field now for those of you thinking of moving into new fields. And it was a great field then. In between, it kind of fell on hard times a little bit for a while. But it's now, there's an enormous amount of interesting stuff going on in insurance. Terrorism insurance, environmental insurance. Insurance is a very, very interesting topic. Do you want to save through insurance or not, and so forth. So I've become very interested in insurance, and that's really what got me interested in this field. Because another way to think about parental leave is to think of it as an insurance policy. We make believe this week, we are, at some point in our lives, we go to law school, we're 20-somethings, we don't know how many children we'll have, we don't know what kind of jobs we'll have. We get together and we think, the opportunity cost of having children is really pretty high. It's not just paying the hospital bills from the inevitable C-section. It's much more than that. We'll be out of work for 6 months, a year, 2 years. Maybe we won't want to come back. Why don't we all get together and have an insurance policy? You don't know how you'll feel. You don't know how many kids you'll have. I don't know how many kids I'll have. Why don't we just get together and agree on a parental leave policy where we will have a generous policy of the Italian kind, let's say. That might be a way to think about parental policy. Which countries have such policy and which don't? In other words, it might not be intergenerational. You might think that people are too short-sighted to care about their Social Security checks. Or maybe it's hard to get people to vote for you as a politician if you tell them this is what you need to do in order to have people who will support you in your old age. They might be like teenagers, where they think about the here and now. Well, the here and now is about who's going to help me maintain my lifestyle when I have a baby next year. And that might be a way to think about the insurance. Well, it's not a convenient insurance policy. I will ask after this why people don't buy private insurance for this. It's not an easy insurance policy to set up, because the obvious problem is that there are a fair number of people, say in the United States, there are people who know that they're likely to have a lot of kids. And there are other people who know that they're likely not to have a lot of kids. And they don't want to vote for politicians who are going to offer an insurance. It's not like a lot of other kinds of insurance where you don't really know your situation. It might be that people have a pretty good idea of whether they're likely to have few kids or many kids. And certainly a pretty good idea of whether they're likely to be high income or low income. So I'll give this theory quickly rather than spending a lot of time on it and say, I think you could make a workable alternative hypothesis or additional hypothesis that says the more you have income disparities in your country, that is, the United States famously has paralegals and law firm partners. Sweden famously has tennis pros, or whatever they all are. They're all making much closer, there's much less income disparity in Sweden. And homogeneous population in terms of culture, race, I don't know how to describe it, but the disparity in number of children in Sweden is much different from the United States. In the United States, there are urban groups, rural groups, ethnic groups, all sorts of ways of describing the population. They're religion by religion. There are groups that know, so to speak, statistically, that they're likely to have a lot of children. And there are other groups that know there are a lot of people with 4 kids or more. There are a lot of people with 1 kid or less. That's not true in Sweden. Sweden, there's an enormous bulk of people having 2 children. And then a bunch of people having 1 child. The number of women who are childless in Finland is pretty much the same as the percentage childless in the United States. In almost all these countries, I wish I could make you guess the number, because you're in for a surprise. It's between 85 and 90% of people have a child. So about 10 to 15% of the female population is childless in almost all the countries that I've looked at. But the number of children they have is dramatically different based on the country. And within the country, the disparity is very different. So you see where I'm going with this. In Sweden, take the extreme case, if everybody's going to have 2 children, so to speak, really it's 1.7. But if everybody's going to have 2 children, and everybody's making, in our money, between $42,000 and $79,000 a year, an insurance policy is fairly attractive politically. You don't really know where you'll be. There won't be a lot of cross subsidies. Go ahead and have the state-mandated policy. On the other hand, in the United States, if the income is ranging from $20,000 to $2 million a year, and the number of children is ranging from I'll never have a child as long as I live, 0, to 11, my sister has 11, to 11, you know, you'd be nuts to want to be in the same insurance pool as my sister. Lucky for you, she doesn't live in the United States. But, you know, there are people who are going to have a lot of children out there, and they kind of know it by age 20. They've gotten started on having a lot of children. So I'm going to come back to this later when I talk about two-tier systems in general. But to me, this is an exciting finding of this research. So as I feel like I've stumbled on this idea. So I want to the fertility one, it's kind of well known. All I'm doing is adding immigration to the picture, which makes it a little better. But the thinking about income disparity and homogeneous population in terms of number of children, that I think has not been said before. So I want to make sure everybody understands that before I go on. A fun thing about that theory that makes it much better, you might say, well, why do people need insurance? But a fun thing about that is that people overestimate how many children they'll have. So say in Sweden, there are interesting studies of this. If you go around and ask Swedish women how many children they expect to have, even when you ask them at age 25, that you ask them very close to when they're about to have the children, and you say, how many children do you have? The answers are evenly spread between 1, 2, 3, and 4. Very few Swedish women say 5. A few say 5. Very few say 0. They're right. 90% of them will have a child. But they give about equal answers. Now, if they give an answer that averages something like 2.5. Whereas, in fact, we know that they're only going to have 1.7. So there's a dramatic overestimate. Right? That's a 50% overestimate of the number of children. Well, now you see why this excites me. Oh, wow, this is great. You offer people this policy. They want the policy because they overestimate how many children they'll have. They think other people will subsidize them. Really, you're only going to have one child. You're going to subsidize the next generation and so forth. That is not a bad story of how the politics of this works. American women also overestimate how many children they have. What's really most remarkable, I thought to myself, I wonder where, how high does the birth rate have to go before women overestimate how many children they'll have? So how are you going to find out, right? I mean, we have research stipends at my law school, but it would be unseemly for me to travel to go ask. But fortunately, someone did a PhD study on this in the Sudan. So Sudan has a birth rate. Well, I don't want to tell you the birth rate yet. I tried to find countries with high birth rates. Now, there's a rural-urban differential in Sudan. But if you ask Sudanese women, either before they have a first child or after they have a first child, how many children they expect to have, they say 6.4. By the way, one of the studies say how many do you want, and some of the studies say how many do you think you'll have. I'm not sure which number you like better. I'm not sure which one to go with, but the studies are similar. I just want to report that in honesty. So they say 6.4, dramatic overestimate. They actually only have 4.72. So even at the very high end, people are really overestimating the number of children they have. It's true. I have a feeling that if we had enough PhD students, we would find that this is true in all cultures. Because in the 5 or 6 we have good data for, people overestimate this. So that might be, an important part of this kind of theory. Again, I want to say it again. That explanation is that it's our income disparities plus our heterogeneous population that makes us disinclined to supply this insurance, though there's always a political move towards the insurance because of people's overestimates of their own desire or expectation of having children. Okay. A couple of asides before moving to the private sector. One, fertility policies don't work. That's sort of useful to know. So these countries, I think I have well described. I think the first theory does describe, the Bulgaria, Italy versus the United States, Canada, Sudan policy, so to speak. But try as they may, these policies have very, very little effect on fertility. There's a small effect. Part of the problem is there's sort of very little good data because what you'd really want to know is if you had a really poor country where a subsidy might mean a lot in incentives, what would happen if you gave women a lot of money to have babies? That's sort of what you'd want to know. And we don't have that, right? We don't have, for obvious reasons, you don't find a really poor country saying, we'll give you $20,000 a baby to have a baby because we need more babies for the next generation. Also, the poor countries tend to have fairly high fertility rates so that they don't need to do this experiment for us in order to figure out how many babies. So it's a natural experiment that has trouble getting going, so to speak. I hope you understood what I meant. I didn't mean that in the politically incorrect way, though it wouldn't bother me if it were. I mean it in the correct way, that it's driven by politics, and the politics, for example, we could put it in the politically incorrect way. Why doesn't Romania or Italy, why don't they just pay women $20,000 to have a baby? Why doesn't somebody just do that? Well, the answer is the politically incorrect answer. No country does that. One country, Israel, tried for a while and quickly withdrew the policy. Because what happens if you do that is that poor women have a lot of babies, and law firm associates, in fact, have a perverse effect. They stay at work longer because their tax rates rise to pay for $20,000, and they are not giving up the extra home in their retirement. And so they stay at work. That appears to be the data. So it's a very interesting problem, and politically incorrect as it is, there's no country that wants its poor women having more babies. Every country, the politics of it is, we can figure out a way for those investment bankers and doctors to have more kids, and for the poor women, well, could they just work in the restaurants and that would be perfect, kind of thing. That is the political goal. If you look at the policies, that's what they're all trying to do. They don't want to make payments, they want the salary caps and everything else. And so it's very, very hard to get the investment bankers to have more kids, and no one experiments with the opposite. The only really good live experiment, some of you may know this, goes back to the 5th grade research paper. Romania in the communist era really wanted more kids. And then you may recall they had this really exciting dictator and his even more exciting spouse. And they, talk about politically incorrect experiments, they tried lots of things. So they tried for a while, okay, we'll give you a 30% tax rate cut if you have a child this year. No offense. And I think the moral of the story is, in a depressed economy, in a depressed nation where people don't like tyrannical rule and they want to leave the country, and tanks are rolling down the streets all the time. You can promise people anything economically. That's not why they're not having children. It just doesn't seem. I don't need to put my own politics in it, but there are situations, kinds of wars, where people don't want to have children, and offering them money doesn't seem to make much of a difference. So we don't really have peacetime live experiments of this kind. One more anomaly is China. I promised to get back to it. Very, very interesting. China famously wants to decrease fertility rather than increase. It's done a very good job. It's at 1.78 now. It's worked very, very hard to get into the 1.7s. And yet it's an anomaly. It has this pretty good policy that I described, even though I couldn't find people who took it. I think we have to count that as a generous policy, because it's not as if I know that in all these other countries people actually take it. Though in some countries, like Sweden, you must take it. It's a misdemeanor not to take the parental leave policy. It's a misdemeanor for the father not to take 3 months off. So, yeah, that is, put that in your libertarian pipe. Okay. It's an interesting pre-commitment strategy, I think. And of course, there's a critical mass, and if everybody down the hallway is taking it, you don't feel bad taking it. You could see the logic of it. But it only works in a homogeneous society. I think if we would say that, somebody would feel like it was discriminatory and the like. Sweden, they can get away with that, just like China can get away with that. So China is an interesting example of a fairly generous, on paper, parental leave policy, and they don't want the fertility rate to be high. They want it to be lower rather than higher. But it's a trick, because it's not really as generous as it sounds. You only get that parental leave if it was an approved certificated birth. So as you may know, in China, you need to get approval to have the child under the one-child policy, where there's some exceptions made for a second child and so forth. So you need this certificate that, like, the village elders, so to speak, the apparatchiks have agreed that you can have a child. When you have that child, you get this leave. Not if you have a forbidden, discouraged child. A lot of interesting stuff there. Just to throw out trivia while we have it. You get the same leave after an abortion in China if the abortion is from one of those certificated pregnancies. In other words, having an unwanted, meaning unwanted by the state, pregnancy does not give you any rights at all, aborted or not. I mean, indeed, as we know, there are discouragements to having the child, severe discouragements. But if you have this approved child, and then you have an abortion for whatever reason, it's the same treatment. It's the same generous 90 or 120 days, depending on your age. Actually, I'm not sure that there's an age kicker in there, but maybe 90. So why no private insurance before turning to the other part of the private market? That seems easy. You might say, well, in the United States, after all, if we don't have paid leave, why don't we just buy it? I mean, many of us have private insurance on our houses. If we thought we wanted paid leave, we don't need the government to do it, you might say. If the government does, then we understand. We're going to pay higher taxes, and the government will give us this insurance policy under that theme. Presumably, we could, Aetna could offer this policy on its own. We could say to people in college, you wish you lived in Europe? We'll give you a Europe-like experience in the United States. You pay premiums, we'll give you paid parental leave. It's not quite insurance of the kind we had in mind. Oh, and your first reaction might be, oh, that wouldn't work, because Levmore's sister, knowing she's going to have 11 kids, would buy the insurance. But, they could put a cap on it. They could say, and we will only pay the benefits for 2 or 3 children. I mean, it wouldn't be that hard to get rid of these moral hazard problems. I think the reason we don't find it is that it's not very exciting insurance. It's not really insurance. It's more like a Christmas club, and the chronology is wrong, right? It's more like, oh, if you don't have enough self-control to save money for Christmas or for having a child, we'll help you do it by selling you a policy where you'll put, people do buy burial insurance. It's not crazy to have an insurance policy that really is nothing more than a forced savings plan. The problem, of course, with doing it for parental leave is that most people are in their low earning years before the parental leave. What you really need is like educational loans. And I could imagine that. I can imagine a government that said, we want you to invest in human capital, we want you to invest in having children, we want you to go back to work afterwards. We will lend you money now based on your future earnings after your kids go off to school, let's say, and you'll give us more money then, and we will now give you paid parental leave. You might have a lot of bankruptcies. I mean, it might not work so well, but it's a long-term Christmas club, I think, that we're really talking about. And, maybe that seems a little bit less attractive, or maybe that explains why we don't find it. If it came from the employer, rather than a private insurance or government fund, that would be a blatant cross-subsidy, right? Childless, older employees would be giving money to younger employees with children, and since people don't necessarily stay at the same workplace for a long time, that might lead to a lot of resentment and a lot of competition in the workplace with new employers showing up. I think it's sort of an unstable environment, and that's probably why we don't find it. All right, now I'm going to switch gears and talk about our private world in the United States. And the way you could think of this is the same topic, the insurance cross-subsidy topic, closer to home. So let's describe our world, make sure we agree on what it looks like, and then talk about it for the rest of the time. Our world looks like this. We have a 2-tier system. If you are thinking of giving birth, and you are a secretary at an engineering firm, or a paralegal at a law firm, or have an electrician at the University of Chicago, you are a modestly paid staff member at an organization, private employer, then you have, by and large, fairly bad parental benefits. I might add the Case Western is an exception to that. I don't know if you visited your website, but I went and looked. You actually have very good paid leave for staff members. I'll describe it in a minute, but you accumulate weeks or months based on how long you're at the workforce. Well, somebody who's been here 3 years in a low-paying job could get 3 months of paid leave on, they could do the same as the lawyer and the faculty member, as we'll see in a moment. That's very, very unusual. At the University of Chicago, there is no paid leave at all. There's the disability plan, and so I wrote that down, too, here somewhere. At my university, staff receive 10 days sick leave per year, and you can roll that over, but you can only use it with medical certification. So you give birth, you get your doctor to give you a note that says, well, she gave birth and she is really not ready to go back to work. And that might work for, say, typically people might use 2 weeks of that or something of the sort, and then they might go to a short-term disability policy, which is 13 weeks at 60% pay. And then that's it. And then if they want more time, they need to ask for unpaid leave. The university doesn't have to give it because it's beyond the 12-week federal mandate. That's more of a typical private employer policy. I'll just say it again. Sick leave or disability leave of some kind for a couple of weeks, followed by some number of weeks, maybe an average of 9 to 13 weeks, of partial pay. That is 60% pay up to some cap. $413 was the number used in Canada. That's not so different for the number used in the United States. So it's modest disability leave. In the United States, as you know, you could buy a private add-on policy if you're really worried about disability, but most of them will exclude childbirth and the like. So some money followed by a little bit of money for a longer period of time, but nothing like the European thing. So the electrician at the University of Chicago, she would much rather live in Europe, so to speak, for that period of time. On the other hand, the law professor at Chicago, or the associate at the high-end law firm, again, I didn't look at Cleveland law firms, but I assume they're similar. Wow. I mean, there's a lot of money in it. So there are a fair number of Chicago law firms. Every law firm seems to be giving associates at least 12 weeks of paid leave. Let's call that almost 3 months. But many of them are giving 4 months of paid leave, where paid leave means paid leave. It means at that $160,000 rate a year. So, 4 months, almost everybody has 3 months in that system, so you can think of that as worth $40,000. But there are a fair number of firms giving 4 months paid leave. So that's a $60,000 benefit. And that's an expensive fringe benefit, but it makes the opportunity costs go close to zero. Not quite zero, because some of the firms have bonuses at Christmas that you would only earn if you had been there that fraction of the year. Again, a subject that maybe we could return to. So you get the general idea? If you're a secretary at the University of Chicago or at Kirkland & Ellis in Chicago, your leave might be worth between, say, $7,000 and $12,000 if you're an experienced secretary. If you're a lawyer at Kirkland & Ellis, your paid leave is worth about $60,000 if you're a first or second or third year associate. It's obvious who needs the money more and who's getting it. I mean, I don't want to preach because I'm not basically preaching. It's a market, and we'll understand the market in a minute. And you understand what I mean by the secretary wishes she had the European plan. She envies the European plan. The associate would hate the European plan. Because in fact, the European generosity squeezes out the two-tier plan. It could be that in Europe there would be these mandates, and then the Kirkland & Ellis of Sweden would say, oh, on top of that, we give you $50,000. No, they don't. Pretty much everybody, it's quite egalitarian, and we find almost no private add-ons. In China, you do find private add-ons. Paul Weiss, for example, has an add-on in China that's different from its U.S. add-on. But that's relatively unusual. Now, there's a theory there, right? I was introduced as being interested in public choice, so it wouldn't be I if I didn't give you a public choice theory. But this is not a bad theory, actually. Although I'm not going to run with it very far, but think about it this way. Here's the diabolical theory. So in the United States, the Kirkland & Ellis associates get, $40,000 for giving birth. They get 4 months paid leave, as do a lot of other high-end American employees. The paralegal who works for them gets very, very little paid leave. The law professor at the University of Chicago gets a lot of paid leave. At the University of Virginia, where I used to be, for a while, it was maternal and paternal leave of 1 semester leave. So again, we could think of that as worth $40,000 to $50,000 to $60,000 to $70,000, depending on the seniority of the faculty member. Now, that's very, very, very valuable paid leave. Virginia changed the policy for reasons I'll go into, so that the parent has to aver, if it's the male, he has to aver that he is the primary caregiver in order to get the leave. But we'll return to that shortly. So those people do not envy Europe. But the theory that, I guess is obvious, to say something like this. Well, there are these interest groups, and you can be sure that if associates or engineers did not have paid leave, there'd be this problem of people in the workforce and people having children, and the birth rate would be dropping, and people would want to come back to work, and they'd want to have children, and they begin to be quite a political movement. All the people who are giving money to Hillary and Barack would say, we really need high-end paid leave. Why don't we do that? Let's be like Europe. Let's be like Europe. But all those people who are contributing to those campaigns, they already get high-paid leave. Or they're not working. But if they're working, they're alone. Well, I'm sorry that the paralegal gets no money, but that's not my problem. And the paralegals are not giving money to Hillary and Barack, so to speak. So you see what I mean? It's like an interest group explanation. that in the United States, the interest group that's politically powerful that would be pushing hardest for mandated or government-supplied insurance paid leave, they already have fantastic leave at most of their workplaces. So they don't need to argue for anything, and they're not all that generous. They don't run around and get it for their secretaries. That's not particularly surprising. It might be that if they didn't have this leave, I can imagine a world in which it wasn't so easy to form an interest group, or we had different campaign finance rules or something. I could well imagine a rule in which it worked out differently. And maybe that is the right explanation of Sweden. You might almost think of the secretaries in Sweden are better organized, so to speak, than the secretaries of the United States, relatively speaking, and they do get this leave. It's not a perfect theory, though I don't want to criticize my own theory here, and maybe you'll do that. It's not perfect because it does require the campaign finance. Why don't this two-tier system develop in Europe? What explains that historically? But I'll leave that either for questions or you can think about it when you get home, so to speak. So this brings us to the purpose of these leaves. And now you'll see where I would like to take you with this. Aside from explaining, I think we now understand the world as we know it. And now, where is the world going? I think that where I want to go is to start with something like this. Why do law firms go to students at Case Western and say, come work for us and we'll give you 3 or 4 months of paid leave? Well, the answer, not because they're nice, not because they think there should be national policy, but because they want to attract the best students. Right? It's an attraction policy. It's a recruitment policy. So it is, in the current environment, a way to attract really good associates, not just female associates, but let's concentrate on females for now. The way to attract really good female associates, they don't know yet whether they will have children and how many, and they overestimate, as we know, is to say to them, well, if you come to our firm, the benefits, we are female-friendly and child-friendly, and we have this really high-end parental leave policy. That is proven a really successful recruitment strategy. So they don't owe it to people. I mean, I'm not preaching about that. It's good business, or so they think, and that's the world that we know. But of course, so you could pause there, but I don't want to pause there. I want to say, but wait a minute. We know it's not working. That is, we also know from widely available data that firms, like engineers and architects, I'm not picking on law firms, I'm just concentrating on them, that firms, unlike universities, have a lot of trouble retaining women, if not parents in general. So the problem is at the retention level, and indeed, I think we're in an unstable equilibrium right now. Right now it's, come work for our firm, you think you'll have 2 or 3 or 4 children, we'll give you $40,000 per child, so to speak, in paid leave. And then people come to the firm, and they maybe take the money once, or possibly they take the money twice, and then a huge fraction of them leave the firm. Well, that's not what the firm had in mind. I mean, it's not bad. It's better than nothing. The firm got them as an employee for a while and was known in the law school world as being a good place to work, and that's very valuable. But the firm would prefer that it encourage people to stay at the firm, and policy is not doing that. That's why I think it's unstable. Now, what would we expect firms to do about it? Well, one possibility is the bonuses that I talked about before. That would be a wimpy theory, but I might say that. It might be that over time we should expect a movement from parental benefits to bonuses, and the idea is that you only earn the bonus by coming back to the firm and being, I don't know, that doesn't strike me as so great. Another possibility would be too politically incorrect to imagine. It could be, come here, you want to have a child? Yeah, okay, we'll give you a few bucks, but we'll give you a lot of money if you come back and stay. You could imagine that. It makes me squeamish to avoid. It doesn't sound like the way to recruit wide-eyed law students. Well, you don't know yourself, you're going to leave. But if you stay and grit it out, we will reward you for abandoning your kids. I mean, that just doesn't sound... It's probably close to the truth, but it doesn't sound like a winning policy. Well, but there is a winning policy available, right? Some firms have moved a step towards the winning policy. One policy is, come back to work, and we have near the firm, at the firm, across the street from the firm, or anywhere you want, we have fantastic drop-off childcare. You have a problem at home, the kid is near death with the flu, no problem. Come to work, drop the kid over there, we'll pay up to, say, 23 days a year. Firms have started that. That makes a lot of sense. But why not all the way? I think that's where it's going to go. All the way would be, we're not that excited about maternity or paternity leave. We'll give you some money, 6 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever. Where we'll invest the money is, after you come back to the firm, we will give you child care credits. Whatever child care arrangement you have, we will give you the same $40,000 or more, but we'll give it to you as an ongoing employee in terms of your child care. Maybe we'll even do it for 3 years, 5 years. That seems to be almost inevitable. So I'll predict that. There will be a dramatic move away from parental leave and towards some sort of child care payments. And they'll find a way to give you the money even if you have, a parent who's taking care of the kid. Oh, you have unpaid child leave? Here. There'll be ways to do that. Because it seems like a much better strategy. It's not politically incorrect. It'll be better for recruitment. You could sort of picture, we find that the cash flow is more important later on. There'll be a lot of ways to say it. And to say to people, parental leave is only good for 4 months. What's that? That's what Kirkland also. 4 months, we're with you forever. We'll give you the child care all the way up until the kid goes to nursery at age 1 or, whenever we want them to go. So I think that it can be done without demoralization costs. Now, it's got problems. It might be twice as expensive because under current sentiment about our gender discrimination law, most people think that you could offer, on the one hand, disabilities law says if you give disability policy, you cannot exclude birth. You can't exclude women because they're doing this thing the men can't do. On the other hand, it cuts the other way later on. It seems to be that if you give women money for child care, you'll have to give men money for child care. Well, that might double the payments. It might be that there are firms now that are giving, parental leave set up as a kind of generous disability thing. And now the money will have to be divided equally. So there'll probably be some compromise, although the more there is a move towards parental leave being taken by both parents, the more it's already doubled, and the child care thing will not be a problem. As I said, law firms are way ahead of universities on this. Law firms generally have a primary caregiver sort of thing that works for males as well as females. I can imagine some funny choices. You might be a little Bulgarian. You might say to your employees, how about this? We'll give you 6 weeks paid maternity/disability policy, or if you prefer, you could take, if you think the stress of child rearing will be greater, you don't have to take that money. You could instead take 30 weeks of paid child care. I'm not sure that would survive a sex discrimination test, but people might try things like that. But you see the idea. The employer will find a way to tie it to retention. Well, it's tempting to say that this is true for the nation as a whole. Going back to my public choice explanation, and now I'm going to wind down with this. Think of all the things we do that are two-tier. Our child care is two-tier. Everything's two-tier in the United States, just about. It looks like we all share public roads, but not really. We have public roads, but they can be thought of as mass transit for the low-end guy, public roads for the high-end guy to get to work. Tap water, bottled water. Public schools, private schools. We're quite accustomed to this idea that we have a two-tier system. It's not clear which is the cart and which is the horse. It might be that if you supply low-end public goods, there's a natural growth of the market for high-end service. Or it might be that if you have income disparities, it's just, as we do, it's just natural that some people want high-end and some people want low-end, and the market therefore provides either high and low, or the government chooses one and the market provides the other. So whatever is true about child care here is also true about roads and schools and healthcare and water and everything else. And you might say to yourself, oh, it's the same problem. It's because we have the high-end one that satisfies the associates that nobody's lobbying to give good public schools. But that's a familiar argument for school vouchers, but not necessarily right. So in a sense, it's a piece of the same argument. Though I want to say, don't complain about it. Just recognize that's what it is. That is a result of having a heterogeneous population with income disparities. That's a natural thing. That not everybody wants the same level of provisions. Our disparities are the cause of the two-tier system. Now, a lecture needs to end on an uplifting note, especially if you're going to have a few questions. So I was thinking, well, what's the uplifting note? Well, it could be, you're in trouble when I say uplifting note, and I have to look at my notes. What was that? I know there was a message there somewhere. You might think of you might be the sort of person who thinks of parental leave as good. By that you might mean that you think it would encourage more children, or would encourage more personal fulfillment, or would encourage something that you want to encourage. You know, if that's maybe working parents or a good role model for kids, you could have a lot of theories about this. In that case, I think my message to you is obvious, though not necessarily inspiring, and it's don't root for more of what we have. That is, if you think what we have is some employers give paid leave, wouldn't it be great if we did more of that? I'm not sure that's the thing to root for, because that's a thing that does not seem to be encouraging retention. It does not seem to be a thing that's providing the two tiers. It's only giving the paid leave to high-end employees who might be the very people who need it less and who are least affected by it, and so forth. I mean, you might like the individual borrowing plans, but I don't think they work that well. You might like to tinker with immigration and fertility rates. That might be where the action is. Again, I think I've suggested that's very, very hard to do. You could spend billions and millions of dollars and maybe have no effect on that. You know, to me, the reason I say it's uplifting is the possibilities. I think of this retention policy as one of our most important national priorities. I think of it this way, that we have come to the place where we're investing in human capital of a broad part of our population, male and female alike, when we were not educating women to this degree 50 or 100 years ago. And now we're finding out that we are dissipating, I don't want to say wasting, but we are dissipating about 30% of that human capital. I don't want to say wasting because I think people probably do make better parents and better community members and better civic leaders if they are well educated as engineers or business people or lawyers or what have you. But if we knew in advance, people came to Case Western and they said, I'm applying to law school, by the way, I have really great LSATs, really good grades, I'm not going to work one day in my life. Rankings aside, you would reject it. That is, for all you believe, yeah, people might make better mothers or better than, come on. I mean, we would not be spending, billions and billions of dollars on human capital if we thought people were not going to work. But we actually know that a high fraction of people, male and female, but more female, will drop out with our current policies. So to me, the retention question is a really important national policy. If only because there'll be a backlash otherwise, right? If only because this can't keep up, where people are going to donate money for scholarships to people who are then not going to work and so forth. I mean, something's got to change, and maybe it's in the child care direction, or maybe somewhere else. But to me, that's exciting. Trying to figure out how to capture this human capital, how to create more opportunities for people after they have children. That, to me, is really where the action is, to the tune of trillions and trillions of dollars. And that's why the subject interests me, because it's to that question that I hope to turn my own attention. Thank you very much. So I'm thrilled that there's some questions. I will try to repeat the question. If it's reasonably short, I'll repeat it so we can all hear it. Sir?
I first want to congratulate you on being the funniest dean I've ever heard. Not that it's...
The competition's not so.
It's not you don't mention anything about the quality of child care and whether or not we can raise the next generation better if we have paternity leave or if we have paid child care.
Yeah.
And about early bonding of parent and child.
Right. So the question is, I'm holding constant quality of child care, and it may be that maybe this is perverse. I think is the implicit question that if we encourage through taxes or otherwise, or we just find more child care, less parental leave encouragement, maybe it'll work, and maybe that'll create more drop-offs, so to speak, and maybe I should not want my children or the society's children being brought up in daycare centers or whatever. Maybe the quality is at stake. I am sort of agnostic about that. I have a friend who's working, you might know, Mavis Hetherington at the University of Virginia, who has spent her entire distinguished career studying this. And, I think the evidence is mixed. I mean, there's a fair amount of evidence that those of us who spend a lot of time on our children, or those of you who have parents who spend a lot of time on you, there are a fair number of psychologists who think, you wasted your time. And given the way my teenager is now moving, maybe they're onto something. It's really mixed. It's natural to believe that the more time you spend shopping for art, the better the art on your walls. But as we know when we visit people's houses, a lot of them would be a lot better off if they had delegated it to the market. And we're not so sure about child care. The evidence is really quite complicated about whether we really could show the quality of care. That's why I purposely tried to word it in the politically neutral way of think of it as personal fulfillment. I mean, if somebody wants to be a parent, I think that's a great thing. I don't mean that the people who are working are not parents. But, you know, if somebody wants to be a non-working parent, I think it's great if they fulfill themselves that way. Somebody else wants to be working. I try not to have an opinion about that. If we found systematically that one method of childcare was much better than the other in terms of producing a better and safe nation, you know, I think that would be dramatic. But, no, I think the evidence is actually mixed. And one way to think about it that's really politically incorrect is to remember, it's not about the investment bankers. They have great lead as it is. It's really about the University of Chicago electrician. And that person's under a lot of financial stress. I'm not sure that you want that person, that you'd like the world better if that person stayed home and brought up their kids. You know, they might be better off having early schools to go to. It's not obvious that we want everybody to invest more and more and more in staying out of the workplace. But you're right. I try to not mention it.
How much do we know about how much like China, Wall Street might be? Apparently, I need to project better. And the reason I ask, when I went off to a law firm after law school, the place that I went to had paternity leave, and I thought, oh, gee, how progressive. And that was one of the reasons why I went to this law firm. And then had a child and was about the only person at the law firm who didn't understand that associates weren't supposed to take paternity leave. I'm assuming a lot of law students...
So stop right there. It's dramatically different.
It's
I mean, there's a
different.
lot of evidence about this, and the generation after you is taking its leave, male and female alike. So I've looked into this a little bit. I thought this would be a good area of research. It's boring. Meaning, I did 8 Boston law firms. Everybody took the leave, males and females alike. It's accepted. Now, what the partners say is, oh, yeah, that's the problem with young people today. They don't know the value of work. Drop of a hat, they're all off. I want to be normative about it. I'm just saying, you know, don't go there. The world has changed. It's like faculty. You offer parental leave, everybody's going to take it. And, well, they expect people not to come back, and then they're surprised when some of them come back. Well, some of them do come back, because everybody takes it. Everybody takes it. Chicago law firms, not everybody, 80% of the people take it, but, you know, it's very, very, very high. So gone are the days when you could, same with leave. I never took sabbatical when I was at Virginia. I was proud of that. I'm always in there teaching. You know, people now look at me like, you know, you're sick. You know, okay. Yep.
I know you're not an older guy, but
Thank you. That's the nicest thing.
you're welcome. Isn't your solution a little bit regressive in that who's going to want to invest all those resources in a sort of low-skill, low-training, fungible person? Isn't it still going to be top-loaded with the law firm associates who don't need the good benefits anyway?
Well, Chicago question. Yeah.
Thank you. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think, I mean, I didn't have time to go over that route. I think that what will happen is the law firms, afraid of free riding among themselves, not to mention about the spouses firm, so to speak, will then put industry pressure on the government to create these mandates. So I think we'll get there, though it'll be indefinite. It'll be a little bit indirect. Does that make sense? I wish I could say, look, that's what happened in Romania or Sweden. It's not. It seems to have grown, overnight as a social insurance policy. But I agree. I mean, that's a problem. The retention numbers are true all over the world, except in the poorest places. So the idea, it's not just that in Sweden people overestimate how many children they'll have, as they do in the United States, but that they overestimate their desire to stay at work after they have children. So Sweden and Mayor Brown, the big Chicago law firm, are identical. There is no one in the last 15 years at Mayor Brown, not a single woman at Mayor Brown, remained full-time at work after having a second child. And this is like 100-something people. This is really, Sweden's the same way. Those people who are having 2, 3, 4 children in Sweden, and there are not many of them, they're not staying at work. So they're not really part of this policy.
Actually, to conclude, we have this to give you. Says with appreciation, Dean Saul Levmore, the Sumner Canary Memorial Lecturer, and the date today, April 17th.
Well,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you, Doug.